Thank you all for coming along, and to our online visitors, thanks very much for attending. So I'm pretty honoured to be here today. What you may or may not know is that I think I spoke at one of the first ever Product Tank meetups when it was Matt and Ants back in the day. I think that was probably about 6 years ago. Was that right?
I think your last one was about 4 years ago.
4 years ago, okay. And obviously things have changed since then. A little bit about me, for those who don't know me. I am one of the directors of Potentia. I've been involved in the product development community for 15 years in New Zealand, and have watched a whole bunch of businesses grow and change, and careers grow and change in that time. For the last, I guess, 10 years, I remember talking to Ants about 9 years ago, and we were talking about product management and talking about how the market was really suffering because it didn't have a lot of product managers in it, or people actually who knew what they were doing in product management. That's very much changed, and even in the last 4 years, that change has accelerated. So today, what I'm going to talk about is I am going to talk about product management. Great, I hear you say. And I'm going to talk about careers in product management. Great, I hear you say again. But what I will say is I spend a lot of time talking with leaders, and I spend a lot of time getting their insights around their specific verticals and their specific careers. And one of the things I will always take the advantage to do when I'm speaking to a group, especially of motivated people who are coming along who care about their industry and who care about their jobs and their careers, is take the opportunity to talk about motivation and talk about purpose and talk about how you can get better dialed into what you do, because I believe that the world is your oyster and you can get any job you want as long as it's the right job for you. So on that note, also I we'll be taking a big Q&A at the end. So if you don't want to say that question out loud in front of an audience, I'm happy to talk individually to each of you as well about any queries you've got. So, all makes sense. By the way, I've been heavily involved in that product development community for a long, long time, both in a people and talent regard and in the guidance of leaders' careers, but also as an investor and an advisor. And so I managed to take it in a lot of different perspectives. So if you've also got views, you're a founder yourself, and how to engage product early on in the life cycle, how to talk to investors, then I'm happy to talk about that as well. Okay. Cool. So here's my grandiose title, Rise Above the Rest, Knowing Yourself and Getting the Right Job in Product. Note the specific Product Tank icon that I've managed to put in there as well. So knowing yourself. This is what we're going to talk about today. It's in these 5 areas. Some of you may have actually experienced some of these conversations before with me, which will be nice for a bit of a reboot. So we'll talk about yourself, and then we'll talk about how that ties into the job that you want to get. Then we'll talk about the actual product job market as it relates to New Zealand and Auckland specifically. And then we'll talk about money and what you should be getting paid. I won't take any responsibility for those particular conversations with your leaders or your managers. And then we'll run into Q&A. Okay. Make sense? So this is just a little bit of insight from me. We've got a little blocker there which says confidence and high performance are rooted in self-belief and talents, not talent. This is my truth. If you agree, great. If you don't, that's okay too, but please let me know why. Motivation, self-discipline, employment and careers built on relationships and perceived capability. Note there's an operative word there, perceived. Golden age. There has been more money come into our tech sector in the last 2 years than there were in the previous 20. It's mental out there, and it's coming in at the ideation level. So we've got high net worth individuals, both local and international, who are investing in ideas. And then we've got Series C, and we've got, all of you probably have seen Bentley and Ben's exit, right? So been massive, more than $1 billion. What is it, 1.5 billion New Zealand dollars on the purchase of those. And product has hit its stage of maturity that it's never hit before. People actually know what it is now, which is quite nice, isn't it? Ask about your values before. What are your values? We've got these values written on the wall here at our business. Do your values agree with those? So I guess from my perspective, often people don't really know what their values are, or they have a projection of their values. People say, what are your values? Oh, continuous improvement, continuous learning, fight the good fight. And why are they important? So here's a little thing that we learned, and if you have read the book, it's gone and disappeared from me now, but anyway, it talks about how there's a structure where your values are the reference points on which you make your decisions. That creates a set of behaviors, which creates a set of stories, which able to identify what your values are. There's a really easy technique. How are you raised? Most values are formed before you turn 7 or 8 years old. So traditionally, they are representative of the way that you were raised, with the family that you were raised with. But sometimes they will be in tune with that. They will affirm those things. And other times they will be a total rejection. For example, with me, I came from an extremely financially insecure family. So I sought financial security. Right? Does that make sense? Now, those values will be something that you should be able to articulate, because it will mean you've got small decisions and big decisions. These are the reference points you come back to. What should I do here, right? The reason that those are important is that they need to align with the decisions that are made inside the organization that you work in or alongside, okay? So it's critical for you to understand what those values are. And this is a lengthy conversation, but we're just trying to make it abridged. So if you want to talk about this further, I'm happy to, and I talk about this with people every day. So happy to try and help you surface what your values are. Legacy. What is your current legacy? If you were to say, what am I known for? What are the things that I've achieved which validate who I am right now, professionally, not personally, but what is your legacy right now? If you had to draw a line in the sand and understand what your legacy is, what are the things that you've created? What are the things that you've achieved, the goals that you kicked? And then from here, deciding what you do next is about understanding what your future legacy is. So what are the things that, if you were here, can you extrapolate out from what you've achieved now to get to your future legacy? Or is there a significant change or in direction that you need to make? Or do you need to increase the velocity or decrease the velocity? Whatever you need. So why these are important is you need to understand this before you can get your next job, or before you can be truly successful in your current job. Because if the things that you've achieved to this point are for you, great, you can extrapolate on. If they're for other people, then you probably need to change. If they are not to the ambition that you think is aligned with who you are, either more or less, then again, you need to refactor those. And you need to make sure that the achievements for your legacy relate to your belief system, which are your values, the way you make decisions. So, for example, how do you add context to this? What's the metaphor? What's the story? So, for example, Kogo, great ESG-based software company, creating all sorts of interesting things around carbon and impact, and so, based upon your transactions. So if you are if one of your values is to have a positive impact upon the world, and you want to work in technology, and you want to work in product management, that agrees with your value set, that's probably an organization that you want to work for. If you don't really care about those things, no judgment. If you care about money and the financial future of your business, then you need to maximize that opportunity and ensure that the legacy that you create lines up with that. A lot of people don't actually write this stuff down. I'd encourage you to write this down, to work out what your values are, what your current legacy is, what your future self of 15 years would tell you to do right now based upon the legacy that they've achieved, and then line those up with the values that you've got, and ensuring that the leaders that you're working with at the moment have agreement on those values that you have. That's all take on board and probably not what you're prepared to talk about today, but I'd encourage you to just settle in. I'll share this presentation afterwards, and so that'll all be available for you. If you want to contact me, all of these folk who organise Product Tank have got my address details, etc. Okay. So next, this all lines up. So you understand the way you make decisions, you understand what your current legacy is, you understand what your future legacy is going to be, and how do you ensure that your motivation is at a point that is at a maximum? So, through various pieces of reading, often people talk about purpose and they talk about your why. They consider that to be the story or the narrative that's most connected to how you can unlock a degree of motivation, right? What's your narrative? What are you trying to achieve? Why do you do all this stuff? So that's true. That is really, really motivational. But when you think about the total motivational model, it's actually not the most important piece of motivation. Setting yourself goals and challenges, we all know, it's called SMART goals and all that sort of stuff. Setting yourself challenges, making sure that they're specific, and that they meet the criteria that's related to your values and the legacy you want to create. Great, potential. So this is about the challenges. So, am I motivated? Have I got a goal set? Am I trying to achieve it? Absolutely. Okay, great. That's really motivational. Then stacked on top of that is your purpose. So that's even more motivational than the challenges you set. Making sure that your why, your purpose, is dialed into what it is that you want to create the change in the world. This is really, really important, right? So people say, well, why do you do what you do? Have you got an answer for that? Can you articulate that easily? So that's really critical, and that's the next level of motivation up, is the why. The one that gets... And play is about what you do. So if the potential is your goals, it's the achievements, the play is how you do it. So you will have skills and capabilities and strengths that are the things that you're naturally good at, right? So for example, with me, my performance today, I like to influence people. And so I need to be in a job where that's one of my key activities, right? I need to be building relationships. That's key to me. That's what makes me happy. I'll do that if someone pays me or not. And that's a really good measure for you to be able to figure out what your superpowers are, right? Superpowers sounds like some glib management speak, I know that, but these are your strengths. These are the things that you're naturally good at. You will have a whole myriad of strengths because product is the nexus on which a whole bunch of different departments and capabilities meet. Okay, so there might be a wide variety of things that you're good at, but you need to figure out what the key things are that you would do, even if you weren't paid to or not, and make sure the job that... No job's perfect. No job has all the things that you want to do all the time. That's not the case. But if you can find a job where the responsibilities and the activities are aligned with the things that you are really, really good at and that you love to do, and you can wind that into what your purpose is and your narrative and make sure that you're pointing in the same direction as what that business is trying to achieve, whilst being able to challenge yourself and have autonomy and develop mastery to be able to set yourself goals and achieve those things, then you will actually be totally motivated. So there you go. That's the serious bit out the way. So, to get a job, most people think that you get the LinkedIn profile, you get the CV, you make it look nice. Away we go. Makes sense. However, it's not quite that simple. It will get you most of the way there. Information and data is everywhere. Social media is a constant Rolodex of information that's constantly spinning, right? And so you putting investment into those things and putting investment into social media will mean that you get some notice, but quickly it ducks away. So the key thing that you want to be able to do is to be able to build relationships, obviously, with industry, and so doing these kinds of things. But then when you have your moment in the sun and you get that interview, it's about being able to be prepared, obviously, but understanding that the preparation that you do and the kind of stories that you write to be able to present to people fall into kind of the preparation that you do is around quantitative, qualitative, and questions. What does that mean? So qualitative, that's the stories. It's being able to recite a story that's compelling for you, that lines up with your values, lines up with things that you've tried to achieve that you think are really meaningful and proud of, the stories that you want to tell. Making sure that it's quantitative so that there are numbers referenced. So those are things like within product, you're talking about traction, you're talking about the customer data that you've used, you're talking about the validity of that product, you're talking about when it got profitable, you're talking about the number of products in the portfolio, etc. So making sure that the stories are really compelling and you've practiced them, and making sure that the measures that you've got in place are quantitative, so they're basically not vanity metrics, they're meaningful metrics that are related to proper product. Prepare those questions so that you're able to be in a position where you can understand that the interviewer is someone that you understand what their pain is, you understand what they're curious about, and the questions that you have geared show that you've got those insights, show that you've got the commercial capability, the technical capability, the delivery capability.
Apparently having a few audio dropout problems, so can I just swap your microphone out? Thanks.
How's that? Is that all right now?
Try that again.
La la la.
One more time.
Sure. How's that?
Yep. Perfect.
Preparation,
Thanks.
quantitative, qualitative question. Is this all? I'm moving quite fast here because I want to get to the Q&A where I stop talking and you guys start talking as well. So is this all making sense so far? Great. So let's say that you've done the preparation, you've prepared the stories, you've practiced them on your flatmate or your partner. You've got the quantitative numbers, the ones that are meaningful to both you and to the business, and you're proud of those things, and you've prepared the questions for that particular audience. So you're in the room, you've built that relationship. Sorry, you've done the preparation. Now it's time to build that relationship. And when I talk about performance, most people are very unfamiliar with interviews, right? Most people might have watched, well, some people might have watched a YouTube tutorial about how to run a great interview. They will have done the preparation, but you go in there and you don't know how to build that relationship quickly. You may not have met that person before. Now, some people are very, very good at interviews. Sometimes there's an inverse relationship between their ability to conquer an interview and their ability to conquer a job. Very common, especially in sales. Now, the interesting thing that happens is if you have done, cycling back, if you've done the work on the values and you know what the legacy you've created is and you know the legacy you want to create, then you've got a lot of insight into yourself. And so you can come from a position of confidence. Then, if you've done the work around what you understand being your motivations, so the goals that you want to achieve, the purpose that which you have, and what your particular strengths and skills are, your superpowers, then what that allows you to do is have great insight into yourself and feel confident that actually you're coming from a position of truth. When you have a self-confidence and belief, it allows you to perform in a different kind of way. Every athlete's already run the race. Every great public speaker's done the speech 1 million times in their head and probably 100 times in person. So what I talk about is I talk about the watch seller and the preacher. And Melissa, I've already had this conversation with, but it's quite a difficult metaphor to explain. Let me give it a go. So let's say that you've packaged, right? That's what I call it when you've got your values aligned and etc. Now, most people enter an interview like a watch seller on the corner. What does that mean? It means they've got the jacket open. You want the gold one? You want the silver one? You want the watch with the leather strap? The metal strap? Look at all my skills. Take what you want. I can do this, I can do that. Right? You've all been in one of those interviews. You may well have been that person in that interview, telling people all of the things that you can do well. It creates the wrong power balance and it builds the wrong relationship right from the start. It talks about a mindset of scarcity, but what it's someone saying, you know, pick what you like, okay? Just like the watch seller on the corner who's got his jacket open trying to sell a watch, it's not particularly compelling. Now, I don't know how many people in this room have interviewed people or been, no doubt everyone in this interview has been interviewed themselves. So could I get a show of hands on how many people have actually interviewed as a hiring manager in this room? Okay, most of you, great. So you'll understand this. When the person sits down over the other side of the table with you and they've got belief and they know who they are, the response often is, oh, thank God you're here. Because you know that that person is coming from a position of truth and capability and performance because they know themselves, they know what they want to achieve, and if you've got that opportunity for them, you can give them autonomy and they'll crush it, right? The same needs to be true of yourself. So you need to be the preacher. You need to have the belief in who you are, what you're trying to achieve, the values that you have are definitive and they're valid, and the legacy that you're trying to create, again, is something that's really compelling. Because what that allows you to do is sit down and say, this is who I am, this is why I'm here, this is what I will achieve. You need to give me this opportunity, not demanding it, but you need to give me this opportunity because that's what I'm going to do anyway. Now, if that opportunity is not here, thank you very much. We don't need to talk anymore. Now, that's obviously a fantastic kind of vision to be able to achieve, but that's not how it's going to run. You're obviously going to be able to put a whole bunch of social capability over the top of that as well, but that's ultimately the message. And so what I say is that if you can become the preacher, you'll get whatever job you want, because it's going to be the right job for you, because you know what you want to achieve, you know why you want to achieve it, and you know how you're going to do it. Make sense? The last bit here is about saying no. What you'll find is when you come from this position, you get a hell of a lot more job offers. You get a hell of a lot more people that are interested in what you do. And so now it's up to you. The power balance has changed. So it's up to you to understand when to say no. If you've got a leader that you don't trust, that you've met in that, if you don't click with that person, or you don't feel like an initial connection of trust, either they make decisions differently to you, the value set they have is different, the direction of the business is different, and the type of organization is not in the direction that you want to go, then you need to say no. And you need to know that there will be an opportunity. Obviously, this is coming from a position of luxury where you've got enough money to pay the mortgage and to keep the kids in daycare or to pay the rent. But if you do have that luxury, you need to be able to say no when your gut and your instincts say that there's not that alignment. There's lots of nice ways to do that, by the way. And if you want to have a couple of tips, I'm happy to help you out there. The other thing are things that people don't usually look at. How is this role going to be measured? Am I set up for success? Am I set up for mastery? Am I set up for autonomy? Are these realistic? Are these things that I can control? And so that's actually a case of going through the job description and figuring out, how am I going to be measured? How do I know if I'm a high performer in this role or not? And that should be something that is easily answerable for the hiring manager. If it's not, it's a massive red flag. The other piece is around engagement and NPS. As you go up higher in an organization, your performance is much more affected by the people around you than if you're in a purely operational role. If you have a role where you need to, as a software developer, you need to produce code, you have some control over what your level of performance is like. As you go up into leadership roles, a lot of you here are hiring managers, you'll find that your peers control your performance a lot more than when you first started your career. If they're not doing their job, then you're screwed, right? So one of the things that you can look at around those things is kind of around metrics, but then also around engagement. And so one of the things that I encourage people to ask, especially in senior roles, is tell me about the employee engagement that's going on in the organization. When was the last survey that you did? What were the scores? How did your benchmarking work? Especially if you're using Culture Amp, bada boom. How's the benchmarking as far as the size of the business that you're in? Or that the tenure. So how much of your 3 to 7 year bracketed people who have been here are engaged as compared to the people who just started or the people who just got promotions? Really difficult question to answer if it's not great. And NPS, obviously, pretty much the same, but for customers. No doubt being in product, you guys know all about NPS. So there you go. Any questions around that stuff? Great. All right, product. This is what you came for. Now that I've got my, what do you call it? My preach out the way. So this is what you came for. Product, job, market, insights. We're in a, as I said before, we're in a golden age for New Zealand technology. Literally in the time I've been, since I cared, the GDP contribution of the tech sector has gone from number 10 to number 2, right? So we're in a fantastic position right now. Software export, technology export is going crazy. We're doing amazing things. As I said, funding, etc. But also, surprisingly, you've got a very engaged startup community now. There's a lot better practices going on. I work as a venture scout for an early stage venture capital company called Hill Ferrance, and they're coming in and bringing in a whole bunch of new practices around valuations and term sheets, etc. We've got a very fruitful ecosystem there. Government's support might not be perfect, but it's a hell of a lot better than it was 10 years ago. In addition to that, you've got the uplift and interest in product management. Now, most startups either come from a subject matter expert or they come from an engineer, right? And so product is not particularly overthought. Why? Because a founder, a subject matter expert, believes he knows what customers want. So let's build that. An engineer doesn't really care. So they're much more about build the thing right and build the right thing. Right. If we build something great, they're bound to come. So the interesting thing around the history of product management for me anyway in the local market, I read Marty Kagan's book Inspired, I think 8 years ago, and I've just read the new update, which is actually really good, if anyone wants to read it. And product management in New Zealand's in a really interesting spot because ISVs kind of know what they should do now. ISVs, independent software vendors, kind of know what they should do around product. As you know, the product disciplines are pretty well established. You pour money into this bucket, you make sure that you've got this data coming in, etc. Product management practices are largely mature. People know what they should do. Whether they do it or not doesn't really matter, but they know what they probably should do. There's a playbook. Enterprise, I can't believe I'm saying this because I've been shitting on enterprise products for so long. Enterprise products actually got the most interesting state right now. Productization, digital transformation, the search for new operational models, the productization of services, all of these things are now happening, and it's right in its infancy. And so when I talk about the product job market insights, I'm now telling people, and I still can't believe I'm doing this, that actually, if you really want to have a major impact upon product, you may find that that path is an enterprise. I'm not seeing a lot of shaking heads, which is quite encouraging, so I must be on the button. Also, the money's probably a little bit better. Any questions about that stuff? No? Good? Okay. So as far as jobs, I'm rattling through a whole bunch of stuff here. When I had a laugh with Ginger and Ants and Charlie, when we were planning this stuff, we were talking about the fact that no real product job seems that well defined, which is fair enough. And so we said, you know, what are some heuristics that we can use around job definition? Now, again, I will cause the separation between the ISVs and the enterprises, and I'm making it a duopoly there as far as who's employing product people, because obviously that's not true. You've got the consultancies, you've got the independent advisors, you've got all those things. But ultimately, one is to do with, I'm going to productize the technology inside this organization which helps it achieve its core purpose. In an ISV, the technology is the business's key purpose. That's what it sells, right? So they actually do have different needs. Again, call me out here if I'm talking capitalist. But the interesting thing is that a product owner basically is in control of the backlog. That's the definition that's widely accepted across both those when I talk to employers. A product manager is in control or is managing the roadmap. Ultimately, the product manager is more commercial. The product owner is more delivery and execution focused. Okay. Now, when you're talking about product analysts, associate product managers, etc., again, you're starting to get into the minutiae here, and it's a little bit difficult to figure out where that actually sits as far as responsibilities go. In enterprise, a product manager tends to be in control of a vertical of technology services or in control of standing up new digital products inside that enterprise, an innovation center or a ventures kind of organization inside that company. With a product manager, obviously they're responsible for that particular product end to end. We're not talking about the head of product, we're not talking about the VP of product, we're not talking about the product director. All of those kinds of titles are really dependent upon the organization itself. Make sense? Needs and metrics. So as far as product manager goes, you know, you are going to be in control of the money. Often there's some thinking that says a senior product manager should be in control of the P&L of that product. Now that's in some ways contentious because it says actually you got a big price on your head. But in other organizations, if they're not thinking like that, then they're probably not doing the job that they could be doing anyway. That's kind of the rationale that I'm given. With a product owner, you're going to be working with that engineering team largely and working in between with the product manager who will be helping you to prioritize your work, but you will be prioritizing the backlog. Make sense? Those tend to be the core metrics that are looked at as far as being in high performance goes. These are the objective measures. They're not the subjective measures. They're not the team saying, yes, that person's doing great. No, that person's doing rubbish. These are the things that you can be in control of as far as your own personal outputs go. Opportunities. So how many here are working for an ISV as opposed to an enterprise? ISVs? Enterprises? Okay, interesting. It's about an even split. Cool. So as I said before, I think the money is better in enterprise at the moment because often those organizations are trying very hard to make new money by putting in effective product management strategies. Now, that's a massive generalization, but we deal with quite a few different enterprises. As far as ISVs go, often those jobs can be maybe not more rewarding, but certainly people are thinking in the same direction. You don't have to go through the evangelism and education kind of phase about the validity of product. So often those people can be a bit more satisfied with their work because they've got a little bit more control. However, I do think that as far as impact upon the global impression of what New Zealand technology is about, obviously the ISV is more impactful because our products are getting exported lickety split. As far as a path goes, it depends on what your priorities are as far as what the opportunity that you're seeking out. As far as visibility goes, typically when you're in control of an ISV, as far as a career goes, you are in control of that product, which may have millions and millions of customers. Product managers within enterprises may not have as many. If it's an external facing product, if you work for an organization which is B2C, and you're in control of the website product or the news platform, etc., then the visibility of that product is very high. You can come and tell me about how you judge whether you're getting fairly remunerated against the gravity of your product. I'm happy to talk about that as well. It's a little bit, again, there's some rules of thumb that you can work to. Remuneration, contentious. I've said here, so we do a remuneration report every year. We build upon all the different data sets that we've gathered over the previous years. We're currently up to about 4,000 data points with our current remuneration report. That's not including all the past data points as well. So it's fairly accurate. However, COVID has thrown a total spanner in the mix. And what I've said here is that remuneration is kind of echoing house prices at the moment in product. That's a good thing. There should be more smiles. But the thing is that, again, it is so dependent upon what it is that you're responsible for, your level of experience, and actually that organization's view of product, right? In this particular case, what we're seeing is we've seen 20% increases in most roles since 12 months ago. We're just about to finish the data gathering of our latest remuneration report. So the information that I'm about to put up is more than 12 months old. So if you can think that there's been, in some cases, a 20% increase, in most cases, you're talking about a 10% increase. That's what our average kind of rise was year on year for the last wee while. But the question to probably ask yourself is, why am I still getting paid the same amount of money as I was last year? In all honesty. And this is not a massive hook to try and get you to apply to all the jobs that I'm advertising at the moment. It is actually to do with having a constructive conversation. So if we arc right back, if you know the metrics that you're performing against and you know what the incentives are that your manager or your peers are looking to achieve, then you should have enough ammunition to have a helpful conversation with the person that's judging your remuneration level. Make sense? Cool. Packages. How many people know what Esop is? Okay, cool. Hopefully you all know what salary is. STI, no, I'm not talking about that kind of STI from university. I'm talking about short-term incentives. So an at-risk component is your bonus, right? So typically a bonus sits anywhere between 5 and 20%. In some cases, 40%. Some of the leaders that I'm dealing with, I'm just working with a chief product officer role at the moment, and they're talking about a 40% bonus, plus an ESOP sitting on top of that. So you can get these massive, increasing packages if you're prepared to negotiate those things. Obviously, there's a risk reward thing. The bigger, richer the Esop scheme, typically the younger the business, the more chance that you have of that being basically paper money. But if you can find yourself a role where you've got a strong salary, an at-risk component that you can control that has agreed metrics between you and your manager or you and your peers, and you can get yourself an ESOP and some options, then great. An ESOP is an employment share ownership plan, okay? Typically they vest across 4 years, 3 to 4 years, with 25%, what's called a 12-month cliff. You work for 12 months, you get the first 25% installment, and then every 12 months after that you get 25%. If you work with 0, you have a very, very, very nice ESOP scheme or option scheme to be reckoned with. And it's probably one of the key differentiators around how they can pay 20% more than most of the rest of the market. Okay, happy to talk through that stuff as well. The danger of ESOPs, of course, is that if you're working for an organization that never sells or never goes through what's called a liquidity event, those things are worth nothing. There's a lot of very, very happy vend people who never thought that they were going to see those shares turn into any money, right? And I've had conversations with lots of the people that have been there for a long, long time. So just be careful if you are going through if you're going through a negotiation for an ESOP, just talk about the things like, hey, so who's going to buy us? When? Is it a trade sale? Is it a competitor player? They're buying IP? All these things are just meaningful things to have conversations around. If you're working for an organization that's publicly traded, then it's very different. Okay? Because actually they're immediately worth something, those shares. Cool. Any questions about package? So you're thinking, yeah, but tell us how much people get paid. All right. So this is an excerpt from our latest REM report. You can see that what we've got here are confidence intervals, brackets, okay? Again, this will be available in digital copy. Okay, that's cool. So basically everyone's looking at the far right boxes, right? But these are based upon a whole bunch of answers. So we survey people and we reward them for giving us truthful data. And then they are validated against what we know as well. But it's all just the data. So correct, just the New Zealand market. And mainly Auckland, to be honest, because Auckland people have got bigger mortgages. They're more interested in this stuff. So what we see is these are pretty, I mean, bearing in mind that these experience levels are related to how many years you've been in that job, not in your career, right? So if you come in as a customer support person, you go through an application support and then you head into product ownership, you know, you actually might get straight into the sort of the medium level 3 to 7 years of experience, but typically you'll start in the 0 to 3 years. So it's not saying, you know, if you're, I don't know, if you're in a second career, let's say, and you enter into product ownership, that's kind of what you can expect. Some are paid less. This is just the information that we have. Okay. That's permanent. Sorry. Yep, we have various people that have answered from Wellington. Yes. No, it's this whole perception of what product ownership and product management is inside that organization. If you are in a government role and you're a product manager, I would be a little bit confused about what it is that you're actually doing. Yeah. However, there was a very, very good product manager who was responsible for the IRD's website who was very well paid. Make sense? Any questions? Between, yeah. So no, there's not, because we're just basing it on title. You can't route that to who your employer is. But what we've seen is that those who have deeper pockets in enterprise pay a little bit more than ISVs. But then if you're an early stage ISV, sometimes you'll have a head of product who's paid $60,000 because they were one of the founding 3 people and no one else wants to do product, right? Like that's what happens. So I will say that that's why I'm so careful around things like metrics, control, responsibility, and what stage that business is at, because there are people getting paid not enough money for very, very big roles inside early stage businesses, but that's all the resources that organization has. One of the interesting things, and another macro trend that's coming through now is and I think someone mentioned this in the questions, was around integrated device products. So a lot of the stuff, like 90% of the stuff, is people who are dealing with software, right? We're not talking about integrated devices. We're not talking about hardware. But what we're seeing, so what I'm seeing as an angel investor, but then also from organizations that are coming to me trying to find people, is we're seeing a lot more investment going into devices, a lot more into integrated devices, a lot more into, so for instance, I'm working with a company called Blue Lab at the moment, who are based down in Tauranga. They've jumped from $20 to $40 million revenue in 18 months. They're looking for product managers who understand hardware. There's just not that many organizations that have got product managers who have that understanding. Why? Because hardware is traditionally waterfall. It's very hard to not do waterfall when you're doing hardware, right? It's got to be manufacturable. Whereas software, you can kind of pivot and change, and you can run a really iterative process. So if you have interest in hardware, we are about to see a big increase. And obviously, Holt is one of the most visible ones, where you've got a device and a piece of software. Imager as well, which is an organization that does automated retail. We've got the likes of Navman and all those kind of guys from the way back. So yeah, we're starting to see more and more interest in devices. Contract, anyone here a contractor? Right on. So contract product has been a little bit like contract people leadership. People kind of have really struggled to equate putting a product person into a contract, because they're like, well, we need them to stick around though. We want the IP. But we are seeing more and more of the enterprise change programs and those who are going through digital transformations, who are looking to build up new digital products or do the strategy and commercials around those sort of things in contract positions. It's actually, it's been massively, it's increased by about 400% in the last 2 years, number of contract product people. Most product people though are in full-time roles, because it takes a while to make a product work. There you go. I have included agile coaches. Please forgive me. This, I know, is not a product role, but we never else put it, so we put it there. Thank you. That's it. Thank you. Yeah.
So I'll just start from the top when people are uploading. So if you haven't checked Slido, feel free to check it out. If I feel upload or add your questions, of course, feel free to shout out as well here. So the first one, does the New Zealand job market differentiate between product owner and product manager roles?
Yes, simply yes. But it's the organizations that have an inconsistent view of what a product owner and product manager is. How I describe that. They just need to do an internet search.
So next one, what are leaders asking Potentia for in their desired product management?
So I've had this debate with a bunch of different people, but the way I see product, so let me start again. New Zealand is about 5 to 10 years behind the really big markets as far as product management goes. The US has invested massively in product management for a long time. And part of that is around the use of data and understanding about how data can be used to understand customers better. But it's also been around the funding of those organizations. So being able to have some traceability and some transparency on how you achieve commercial success, which necessitated the development of product management early in those markets. So that's my little preamble. America tends to differentiate between what I would call kind of product marketing more effectively and technical product management. And so they tend to have two different jobs there. In New Zealand, we like the old bootstrapping, and so we kind of bunch them together. So what we tend to get looking for is we tend to get people who are, they want three things, three areas of capability when they look at product management. They want someone who can articulate and communicate a vision and control that vision through a roadmap, being able to talk to the VP of engineering about that, maybe their CEO, etc. So it's that control of product vision, or that product strategy, if you will. I think strategy is an overused word, but product strategy is probably most effective here. Secondly, they want someone who understands the product marketing and the data, the use of data. So understanding your customers, collecting those things, can work with the design, build prototyping, all of those pieces, which relate to very much being the kind of the voice of the customer. The other piece they want is they want product management, delivery processes, and technical product management. So the ability to communicate with engineering teams, to be able to understand what effective delivery processes look like from a product perspective, and the transparency and the ability to communicate with different peers and parties inside that organization, wearing all those different hats in that capacity.
Thank you. So next one, also 4 bolts. What product management capabilities are in high demand that sits above?
So there's kind of different ways you can cut this. So if you're looking to develop your career, as I said before, devices are going to become much more prominent in New Zealand and device products. So if you want to develop skills in hardware, understand hardware, especially IoT and the capture of data and how to use data to be able to build data analytics tools, data visualization, etc. Those are devices and data are huge right now. Obviously, when you're talking about things like AI and ML, so understanding of that space is critical. But I think that, you know, a lot of that stuff, that especially AI and ML, people are using off-the-shelf kind of capability to develop their products in those areas. There's not a lot of people writing brand new algorithms and pushing them into those things unless they're a bona fide data scientist. Do you need to know those sort of things as product management? No, you need to know enough information to be dangerous and be able to hold that person to account as far as, you know, that particular domain goes. The other thing is commercials. So the ability to build products that people will buy. Let's make it real clear. It's the product manager's job, right? It's to build stuff that people are going to buy. And so as much as it's about the ethos of the company and the values of that business, if you're not doing that and you can't successfully do that or prove it, then you have less chance of getting a job. So I think that commercial understanding and the ability to translate that from these are the activities that I do, these are the leading activities that I do to give this lagging outcome of revenue or customer attraction. Yeah, it's probably about it. Yeah.
So next one, how many?
Oh, I'm sorry, enterprise productization. So if you know how to productize services inside an enterprise, that is massively, massively in demand because there are not many people that know how to do that.
How many product managers being hired have been the product manager before versus being another role and moving into product management for the first time?
Yeah, so that's a good question. And I will only talk about it from my perspective. People don't pay me to find people or hire people they can do themselves. That's the given, and that's the way that I'll answer this question. Because if you have internal mobility to take product management jobs, then I won't get involved, so I don't really know about it. But that is a great path. So if you're looking to become a product manager, I would go for internal mobility rather than resigning and trying to get yourself a product manager or a product owner role. Why? Because the transferable skills, the domain capability, the relationships that you built inside that business, the incentive for people to upskill you is much higher inside a business than if to go outside and go, yeah, we'll just roll the dice on this person. It's just not going to happen, right? So I would encourage you to do that. As far as product, if you've got a brilliant product mind, like for example, a fellow that I'm working with at the moment, he came out of software development. He's got an entrepreneurial mindset. When he develops things and builds things with his teams, he thinks about the customers and he gets engaged with those customers. So he builds something that they will want to buy. He's a natural product manager. His strengths are such as transferable. So he could well get, but that is an absolute rarity. Yeah.
so next one, I have experienced that POs in smaller or younger companies have much more responsibilities for which opportunities to pursue than in large corporates.
Absolutely.
Is that true in New Zealand?
Absolutely true. Yeah, look, and that's for the same reasons that we talked about before. It's about resources and maturity of hiring. So you've got a founder who's not built a business before or not run teams before. They're going to go with what they call their gut, right? Which is basically an informed level of intuition based upon subconscious understanding about the way that they made decisions successfully before, that they then translate into a conscious gut decision. So that's the kind of people that they're going to hire. Consequently, product owners then are brought into that role and are given lots and lots of responsibility because there's no maturity behind the decisions that are made with those hiring practices. And it's actually true of New Zealand as well, because we tend to bootstrap things and we have limited resources and hire limited numbers of people because we've got smaller funding rounds to go from. Product owners are often given more responsibility. It's very much not true of the inverse. Product managers are not often given less responsibility.
Okay, next one. It's about COVID. So New Zealand's uptake of remote work versus the rest of the world is shocking. New Zealand's remarkable actions on COVID stumped the acceptance of remote work.
I want to give a true answer to that. And so I'm just going to reflect a little bit. This is more around cultural practices than it is, I think, about remote work. So developers love remote work, right? Because they can control, no one's messing with them, they can control on the problem solving, right? And so typically creative people find remote work more challenging. And product tends to be a more creative role because you're making a lot more, you're making more decisions, more creative decisions that are not necessarily algorithmic in their nature, right? So I would say that remote work actually, well, certainly I don't work with a lot of organizations that reject remote work. I don't know any. What I will say is I think that there are certain organizations, especially that are small and that are living month to month or 6 month by 6 month, that believe that their culture of delivery is created by having all the people in the same room. And I think that that's actually true to some degree. Very senior people who are self-motivated and stuff can work remotely and have virtually no change in their performance. That's true. As long as you have singular outputs. But as soon as you need to deal with conflict and consensus and compromise, you need to have the same people in the same room. Now, you can do that effectively through remote tools. But I think that there are certain organizations that rely more on having people in the same room together. That's a long answer of saying that I don't think it's a case-by-case basis. I don't think that the uptake of remote work is smaller in New Zealand, but we haven't had to do it either. So that's fair enough.
Okay, next one. How would your commentary on the current state of product in New Zealand change if looking at devices for IoT products?
Yeah. So again, ISV, if we look at a maturity spectrum, ISV has a very mature approach to product management. As I said before, people know what they should do, whether they do it or not, it's up to them. Enterprise is probably along that scale. There's been, it's probably 1 in 100 organizations do IoT or devices as compared to software or SaaS startups. The SaaS playbook is so well established that you pour money into these buckets and you tend to get this kind of result. IoT is a lot more difficult. And so the product management maturity around these things, I think, is much, much lower. Yeah.
Okay, next one. What has been the impact of the border closures in regards to product roles? Are companies waiting for borders to open or hire local?
They're all hiring locally. That's what's driving up salaries and remuneration levels, because you've got a massive imbalance in supply and demand. Sorry? No, there's not enough activity. Yeah.
I'm an example of that. They know we're not cheap down here.
Yeah. So there's not, that's true anecdotally, absolutely true. There is definitely activity going on of people hiring, American companies hiring in New Zealand and UK companies hiring in New Zealand. I mean, but that's right across the board. That's not just technology. What I will say, what was the question again?
Oh, sorry.
Is that there's, yeah. So you've got an increasing number of jobs because money's coming in into funding, and the people are sitting on piles of cash and realizing, especially enterprises, that they need to establish new digital operational models or new digital revenue streams. And so that demand is high on the strategic agenda. People are trying to hire. So there's actually more jobs now than there were at the start of COVID, right? In tech, anyway. But you've got a finite or static pool of people. And so there's more and more competition going on. So that is driving up the remuneration levels, I believe, not the occasional. Sorry? No, not at all. From the startup to the enterprise, all aggressive in technology, except, and for the, I realize that also people are looking, they believe that that business will go on. And so they look for a way where they've got, it's better to fail faster and burn all their cash over the next 3 years trying to change the way that they make money and the way they deploy people, rather than fade over the next 10 years and have no business at all. I think that there's definitely a more aggressive mindset as far as at the board table goes. And also you got to remember, money is so cheap. Like if you get a 2% return on the money that you borrow, you're breaking even. So there's so much debt. Corporate debt is crazy. I mean, way worse in the States. But here, money's being borrowed hand over fist. And people are not getting the returns from the same investments that they used to be. So they're just tossing money in. You look at the big buyouts that we don't hear about from the big private equity companies that are investing in New Zealand software companies. Massive. VC, massive. 10 times the activity there was 2 years ago.
Excellent. How many product roles has Potentia placed this year?
Lots.
Credibility check.
Lots.
How many were permanent versus contract?
Yeah. So that's still, it's probably about 2 to 5. So contract to perm now is about 2 to 5.
So what has been the difference between those that gets PM roles versus don't?
I think that's a really difficult question to answer because, so those people who have worked offshore that don't work for organizations that are well known always find it tougher to get jobs, right? If you have worked in the local market and people can see transferable experience based upon what they know of the reputation of the leadership in that business or the business itself, then that does make it a hell of a lot easier for those. It's plug and play, right? Whereas if you're taking a more perceived risk of someone who hasn't worked locally or has worked for an organization that you're unaware of, you've got, it's that human psyche of like, it's the desire to take a less risky approach for something that you're responsible for, So it's difficult to know why those people didn't get jobs. And there's a whole pathway. So if your CV looks rubbish or it's not striking, then you get less traction with recruitment agencies or hiring managers. If your activity level on LinkedIn or social media or meetup groups is lower than another person, then you're less likely to get the interview or to get, if there's a split decision at the end. If you coming from a position of self-belief and you understand your role and why it's meaningful to the business or the organization or the manager, then again, you're more likely to get a job over someone who doesn't or isn't able to articulate those things more accurately. And then I think that there's also the network. So for instance, if I say to Ginger, hey, where's the product jobs at the moment? She goes, I'll go and talk to these 3 people. Again, you're piggybacking on the reputation of those people if you're a known quantity as well. So there's lots and lots and lots of reasons. Yeah.
Okay, so last 2 questions for the audience here and online. If you want to upvote any of the existing questions, do so. So I'm just reading from the top, the highest vote. All right, so the next one got 4 votes. Some vote just happened. What's the most effective hiring process you've seen?
I don't know. So I believe that an effective hiring process is not just about assessing the individual, but that's just me. So I believe that you need to treat the hiring process as a marketing exercise and an employment branding exercise and an employee experience exercise. Because if you think about the cycle of employment, the first impression that you have of an organization is through when you're attracted to that brand. Okay. So I believe that the most effective hiring process is rigorous, but it also manages to make that person feel like a person, not just a resume cycling through a process. So what I will say is, and Colin, with his previous experience at Pushpay, I thought Pushpay did it really, really well. I don't know how they're doing it now. They're still doing the similar approach, eh? Yeah, where, you know, they do a lot of activity and events and they publicize those things. So you understand what it's going to be like to work there. You know what it's going to look like. And I think that the way that they create an employment brand impression there is really strong. Then that first step of that process is about having a coffee. So you go in as a person and you have a meeting of the minds conversation with that hiring manager, as long as you believe that there's been, as long as you are suitable on paper for that role, or you've been given a recommendation. Then you really go through the gauntlet and you hit the crucible where you are peppered with questions from people who are have a deep expertise within their field, and what they're trying to do there is understand where your knowledge stops. So if you think about your skills as a ring, right, which bits, how far out can they push your knowledge to figure out where your knowledge starts and stops, and does that fit with the capability of the business? Then they have a working in day or a working in half day, well, they used to anyway, and you go in and you work with those people. Now, you're not producing production code, you're not producing roadmaps that are going to be used, but what that shows that organization is what you're like to work with, and it gives you the same impression. What are these guys dicks? Are these people lovely? Do they celebrate the difference that I have? Are they looking for cultural fit, or are they looking for what's going to add to the culture? Two different things. So I think that that's a really good example. And it's developed well, by Colin, by Ian, and by Josh Robb, I believe. Is that right? Probably some other peeps as well. Yeah. 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 I just thought it was lovely, and that it made people feel like people.
Okay, so the next one, once you've pivoted internally, when is a good time to look for the next opportunity? Product deliveries under the belt or the number of years?
Yeah, it's never a years thing. It's an achievements thing, and it's around once you've fulfilled your challenges that you've set yourself or set with your leader in that organization. That might be 6 months, it might be 5 years. For instance, I'm working with a person at the moment who is on the exec of an organization that he wrote a 10-year strategic plan, and he's probably six years through that, and they will be going for a trade sale in 2 years. So he said, I'm really nervous because I don't think I'm going to get the kudos if I'm not here for the sale. Fair impression. What I will say is that I think that his hard work's done in that organization. Now, that's not coming from a vested interest perspective. I've known this man for 10 years. But from his perspective, and his is the most important, really, especially because he won't listen to my advice, is that he needs to be there for the sale. He needs to own that sale. He needs to own it. So that's something that's important to him, and it's important to that business. So he'll probably stay, and he'll probably see that out. And I think that's great. So it really needs to be something that you know when you start that job. That's what I would say. And it needs to agree with all the things that we've already talked about.
All right, so that's the